Today we're going to talk about fermenting tomato paste and why you would want to do it and why I think this is a better option than canning. So I went out to the garden, I picked a bunch of my Roma tomatoes and a little small Italian tomato that you use for sun-dried tomatoes. I'm just washing them off, getting all the stems off, making sure and checking that there's not any bad spots that I need to later cut off. Next, I'm going to be going to the cutting board. As always, make sure you've got a really sharp knife that you can use when you're chopping up your vegetables. I ended up having about 30 pounds of tomatoes when we first started. I weighed everything out because the recipe or the place that I saw where to ferment tomatoes was you would get about 8 to 10% weight from your beginning total. So what we're going to do is a wild fermentation. It's a naturally occurring bacteria on the tomatoes, and the airborne yeast make the perfect environment for lactic acid fermentation. So why would I want to ferment tomatoes over canning tomatoes? I did a bunch of tomatoes for canning. I ended up with 2 quarts of marinara sauce after spending hours in the kitchen, and it just wasn't worth my time. And so I started looking into other alternatives besides canning and dehydrating tomatoes. So I'm hoping this wild fermentation is going to work out for us. So after I get all my tomatoes chopped up, the next thing I need to do is start squeezing and crushing the tomatoes. And like I said, you're not going to add any salt. You're not going to add any kind of store-bought culture or anything like that. This is just a wild fermentation. Here I've got some gallon glass jars. You want about a few inches of headspace once you push everything down because everything's going to bubble and ferment. I got my glass jars from azurestandard.com. They're a food co-op that's based out of Oregon, a really nice company. So just crush them up, keep crushing them up. I didn't have to add any water to these. They just were really, really juicy. And I just crushed them until I got enough juice to cover everything really, really well. Unlike a lot of fermentations where you're going to put the cabbage leaf or weights on this, you're not going to do that with this type of fermentation. There's going to be a white mold that grows on top of the fermentation. And this is actually really good. This shows you that it's fermenting, it's caught the wild yeast, and that's just how it's going to be. You can't get around it not molding. It's part of the process. So don't be scared when you open it up and you've got to look at the mold. So these need to sit for 4 to 5 days depending on temperature. So I'm pulling it out. This I think had set for 36 hours or so. And I'm just stirring it all in, pushing the white mold back down into the jar. There's a lot of bubbles going on here and everything's just kind of getting all bubbly. All the solids floated up to the top also. So I had kind of a clearish liquid on the bottom. Here you can see it's not a putrid smell at all. It's not rotting kind of smell. It's just a really strong tomato, just a really strong fermenting tomato smell. All right, guys, so we've been fermenting about 5 days, and it is time to now put this through my squeeze-o strainer and get out as much liquid as we can. And then we are going to hang it in a cheesecloth just like you would cheese to drain it and make tomato paste. So, as you can see, the mold is perfectly fine. I mean, you don't have to strain it, but I just figure why spend all this extra time putting it through the squeeze-o and then, you know, straining extra liquid over the next couple of days. All right, so I'm just gonna put this in my squeeze-o strainer and then we can start cranking this thing, and I will also be straining. I'm gonna go ahead and strain the next batch while I'm pushing this through. All right, so I just bought a cheesecloth in the craft section at Walmart. I pulled it out and this is what I have. All right, so this is really thin. I'm wondering if I should have used like a... Okay, so this isn't completely opened up. Let's hope this holds. Here's my second one. I'm gonna open it halfway, not all the way. Now, this is my first time doing this. Like I said, I am not into fermenting, so this has been a huge project for me this week. The smells, which have been a little strange at times. All right, so I ended up using this entire 6-yard cheesecloth just because I can still see through it and I'm afraid I'm going to lose all the bits of the tomatoes. So I think this cost maybe close to $5 at Walmart, not an economical solution. So we're going to come up with a different plan because I've got 2 big bowls that I've got to do here. So I'm going to slowly pour this in. It seems to be kind of layering, like pushing through the first several layers of cheesecloth. So we'll see how this works. I'm going to, I've got a piece of yarn, so I'm going to kind of just bunch this all up. I'm going to tighten it out really, really tight, probably a few times, because I don't want this to bust down from the place that I'm going to be trying to hang this from. I'm not going to hang it right away from the makeshift stand that we're doing, because as you can see in here, I've already got a lot of liquid coming out. Alright, so I have my cut up t-shirt. I've sterilized it. I boiled in water for several minutes. I cut it up. I'm only using one side of the shirt because if I use 2 sides, I'm afraid that it's gonna take multiple days to strain. So we'll kind of see how this goes. So I'm just gonna pour my strained liquid in here. There we go. So this will be our improvised t-shirt experiment. Like I said, I sterilized it. Want to make sure there's no weird germs or anything. It was washed and then sterilized. Okay, right off the bat I'm noticing the liquid from this one is a lot clearer. Josiah, if you'll come in close, the liquid that's draining from the t-shirt one, the liquid is more of a yellowish, and the liquid on the cheesecloth side is more pink. So I think that this is going to probably end up being more beneficial in the end. We don't have a fancy cheese hanging thing, so we just grabbed a stick from outside. He kind of washed it off some, and I've got it between this little bookcase that I put veggies, and it's on top of my Vitamix over here. It's not the most stable in the world, but I think it'll work for the next 48 hours while I hang this. Each one of these bags probably weighs about a good 8, 9, 10 pounds. I mean, they're pretty heavy. So whatever you put this on, you want to make sure that it's really, really stable. Keep the rest of your family out of it and don't let the kids knock it down. And I'll show you in 24 hours what it looks like.
Yes.
All right, so I've strained this for about almost 2 days. I probably should have opened it up yesterday. So this is one of the bags. You're supposed to get about 8 to 10% of what your original weight of tomatoes was. So we will weigh this today. That is one of our bags. It is a little awkward to scrape it out, that's for sure. I'm trying not to be too messy. Okay, this is the cheesecloth one. This one looks I feel like I lost a lot of the tomato paste. It looks like it sunk a lot into the cheesecloth. So I feel like I'm gonna have a lot of waste on this one. The t-shirt material that I used, I put about half and half, and I definitely got way more tomato paste from the t-shirt. I didn't get that much from this. It's just really sunken in between the layers. I don't see any way for me to scrape out any more than I've already got. So it does, let's just be honest, this looks like I murdered somebody in my kitchen. It's kind of crazy looking. So I got way more out of the t-shirt material. One thing my daughter did mention was that if anybody is feeling squeamish about using an old t-shirt and bleach, and I wouldn't bleach it because I don't like to use bleach, but we sterilized it in boiling water. You could just go to Walmart or somewhere and buy a t-shirt that's on sale for $2. I mean, they're on sale all the time at the end of the year. So you could buy a bunch of dirt cheap, or even in a thrift store, buy brand new t-shirts. So I'm gonna go get the scale and weigh this and see what we ended up with. All right, so I probably should have weighed the measuring cup before I went to put this in here. But you can see how the tomato paste, I mean, it's a tomato paste, it's really nice. You're supposed to add 10 to 25% salt, and that's what's gonna preserve it, and you'll be able to leave it on your counter. The Italians, they like to use 25% salt. Most Americans can only tolerate about 10% salt, and then you can just kind of salt it to taste. I mean, we could probably have strained this a little bit more. It's a little bit thin, but I think the salt will absorb some of the moisture. I like to use real salt, Redmond's real salt. So we're gonna start at 10% salt and kind of see where that leaves us. And then you let it sit for a few hours, and then you mix it up some more, and then you can start tasting it. So 1.5 ounces. Let me turn on my scale. And you don't have to use a scale. I just have a scale because I make herbal products and things like that. So I'm gonna pour that in. You stir this in really, really good. And this is gonna preserve the fermentation. If you leave this on the countertop, it'll last for a few months. If you put it in the refrigerator, it could last up to a year. So as always, when you make any kind of homemade products, you need to label things, date things. So here I am labeling it for the refrigerator. I did do a taste test on camera, but somehow we lost that footage. But when I tasted it, it was super, super, super salty, and but it had this really bold, amazing tomato flavor. I was super impressed with the flavor, but it was salty, and I only did a 10% salt. So if you want to go up to 25%, that you could do that, but it's pretty salty, so watch out for that. I ended up with 1 pound, 1 ounce of tomato paste. So I started with 30 pounds, I think. I got 1.1 pounds, so I ended up with about 3%. And you're supposed to end up with 8 to 10%, so I'm not really sure what went wrong there, but here it is. I hope you guys try this out. I hope you enjoy this, because I'm gonna be making some recipes in the future for this product.